Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, the Egyptian Revolution, the media at the center of the story, and the government that targeted the messenger. Haiti, 1 year after the earthquake. It's not a happy anniversary for news consumers on the island.
Haitians are like animals in a circus.
The story the Israeli government didn't want Israelis to know about, and the woman soldier who's on her way to jail. And what to do when you mistakenly hit reply to all, our web video of the week. Anyone watching state-controlled television in Egypt over a 19-hour period starting last Thursday night witnessed the last confusing act of a dying regime. First, President Hosni Mubarak went on the air and told the country he wasn't about to quit. His vice president then appeared on the same channel and urged Egyptians to turn off international satellite news networks, implying they weren't covering the unrest, they were creating it. Demonstrators quickly converged on the headquarters of government-controlled television and surrounded the building. It was a show of strength against an important symbol of the state. A little more than 12 hours later, Suleiman was back on the air, announcing Mubarak no longer held power. Our starting point this week is Cairo and the media side of a political earthquake of a story that's shaking the rest of the Middle East.
First, they ignore you. Then they laugh at you. Then they fight you.
And then you win.
أيها المواطنون في هذه الظروف العصيبة.
The media moment for which Vice President Omar Suleiman will be forever remembered by Egyptians, when he announced the end of the Mubarak era.
Look at these scenes of euphoria and celebration.
It was carried by news networks around the world, including the satellite channels that 1 day earlier Suleiman had accused of provoking Egypt's political crisis.
Don't listen to satellite television stations who are trying to create unrest and division and to weaken Egypt and distort its image.
Suleiman had criticized international news outlets before, and when he did that, attacks against foreign journalists grew more and more frequent.
You saw a very aggressive campaign on Egyptian state media that essentially fed this public incitement against foreign elements that were behind the protests. It wasn't about whether you were from Canada or Spain or whether you were Al Jazeera. It became a sense of hysteria and xenophobia against foreigners in the country, and most of those were essentially journalists that were here to do their job and report to the world what was happening.
And not just foreigners. An Egyptian print reporter for Al Tawoun, Ahmed Mohammed Mahmoud, was shot and killed by a sniper. Things became so dangerous for journalists that Al Jazeera took the extraordinary step of often withholding the name of correspondents reporting live from the field in order to preserve their anonymity.
Let us speak to one of our other correspondents who's also on the ground there.
The situation here remains extremely electric, extremely volatile.
There was intimidation of new media workers as well. Wael Ghonim, a Google representative credited with starting the Facebook campaign for revolution, was jailed for nearly 2 weeks before surfacing and doing an interview that seemed to re-energize the protest movement.
دي ثورة شباب الإنترنت، دي ثورة شباب الإنترنت اللي بقت بعد كده ثورة شباب مصر، اللي بعد كده بقت ثورة كل مصر.
Wael Ghonim represents so many layers to this dilemma in Egypt. He's young, he's educated, he's very humble, he was emotional, he's very patriotic. He is really representative of so many elements of Egyptian society that people were able to connect with him. He came out and he gave that emotional interview. He spoke as a very simple person with very simple ambitions for his country and how he wanted to live in Egypt and the vision that he had for Egypt.
But most of the journalists targeted were from the mainstream media. CNN's Anderson Cooper among them, swarmed by a pro-Mubarak mob.
He's been hit now like 10 times.
Quite frankly, when American journalists are beaten on the ground in Cairo, it does become more real for the American public. And I wish it weren't that case. I wish that the crackdown on the Egyptians themselves was enough to focus the attention of the American people. But the reality is that it puts an American face on the struggle between the Egyptian government and on the protesters in Tahrir Square. And boy, did that ever backfire on the Mubarak regime.
Particularly when Cooper got back to New York, went on CNN's air, and ripped the authorities in Egypt.
Tonight we begin by focusing on the lies the Egyptian government continues to tell.
Up until that point, much of the coverage on the American airwaves had echoed the Obama administration's line.
Egypt right now puts the U.S. in this delicate position.
That Egypt was a U.S. ally, Mubarak was a stabilizing influence in a volatile region, and despite his flaws, at least he kept Egyptian Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood, at bay politically.
In American television, we really like black hats and white hats. There's no shades of gray, and we're seeing that again here in Egypt. So suddenly there's the Muslim Brotherhood, the bogeyman, and we're buying right into the argument the regime has always made.
The biggest fear for the U.S., that Egypt will turn towards Islamic fundamentalism.
I've been in Egypt in December. I was early January in Tunisia. These are secular uprisings. We've seen in Egypt Muslims, Christians, men, women, old and young walk together in unison to express their opinion. So by trying to spin it and saying something about the Muslim Brotherhood, it just falls back to the same old argument of Islamophobia.
First Tunisia, then Egypt. This weekend the protests spread to Algeria and Yemen. It is worth revisiting a prophetic point made on this program just after the Tunisian government fell, on the evolution and impact of Arab satellite channels on politics in the region in the 15 years since the launch of Al Jazeera.
That initial 15 years was one in which the satellite stations played a role of kind of vicarious expressors of sentiment. Ordinary citizens could turn on Jazeera and see somebody criticizing the Egyptian leader or some Arab dictator that they didn't like. It didn't translate into a process of political change. Neither did any of the different forms of new media. As such, the media has now a dimension to it. Jazeera and the satellite Arab TV stations have a dimension which is beyond emotional letting off steam and actually mobilizing for political change. So this is a historic moment, I think, in the modern Arab media.
Not even Hosni Mubarak, Egypt's former president, would argue with that. Our Global Village Voices now on the continuing media story in Egypt.
One of the main reasons the Mubarak regime cracked down so hard on the internet, indeed blocking it entirely, was because of insecurity. Very, very few countries, such as Burma, actually take this drastic action, mainly because they've lost control of the narrative. In many ways, this of course shows the Mubarak regime is losing the battle for hearts and minds. For me, as an outsider, looking and reading and spending time in the Middle East, the truth is that the Egyptian regime's response is a sign of a weak regime rather than a strong one.
The uprising in Egypt caused a huge media crackdown by the Egyptian authorities because the story simply wouldn't die. The news snowball grew bigger. You had citizen journalists, you had tweeters and Facebook posts. Despite the crackdown, despite journalists being beaten and detained, and despite all that came at them, the media kept at it and they told the story and they were able to show the world how freedom can prevail.
The media here in the United States has paid an enormous amount of attention to the events taking place in Egypt. The protest coverage has been moving so fast that I think it would be hard enough for an Egyptian reporter to keep track of what's happening. It makes it that much more difficult for an American team to come in and digest the situation completely and give a news report which is filled with information and context, not just a report which shows violence and keywords.
If you've got an opinion on the news media that you'd like to get on the air as one of our Global Village Voices, we suggest you join the thousands of our viewers who already follow us on Facebook and Twitter. They go to those sites to find out what stories we're working on so they can weigh in. Or you can just get in touch with us the old-fashioned way, on email. We're at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. A former Israeli soldier, a 24-year-old woman named Anat Kam, has pleaded guilty to leaking thousands of classified military documents to an Israeli newspaper, Haaretz. Kam's guilty plea was reportedly part of a deal she made with the prosecution that saw the more serious charges of spying and intent to harm state security dropped. Kam leaked the documents to journalist Yuri Blau, who produced several investigative reports for Haaretz, one of which alleged the Israeli military carried out illegal assassinations of Palestinian militants on the West Bank. This was a big story in Israel, despite a gag order that prevented it from being openly reported there. Kam spent 4 months under house arrest, and Blau, who was in London when Kam was charged, refused to return to Israel for several months for fear that he, too, would be arrested. Blau eventually made a deal with prosecutors, reportedly surrendering the leaked documents in exchange for immunity. Anat Kam will be sentenced later this year. Her lawyers are asking for leniency, but prosecutors say they'll fight that. The maximum possible sentence in this kind of case is 15 years in prison. Here's a quote from John Kampfner, the director of the Index on Censorship. Quote, "The Russian government's treatment of Luke Harding is petty and vindictive, and evidence, if more was needed, of the poor state of free expression in that country," unquote. Luke Harding is The Guardian's Moscow correspondent, or at least he was until about a week ago when he tried to return to Moscow after a 2-month stint in London. Harding says he was refused entry despite having valid accreditation and told, quote, "For you, Russia is closed," unquote. Then he was put on the first plane back to the UK. There's no official explanation, but there's little doubt that Harding was bounced from Russia because of his coverage of the WikiLeaks diplomatic cables, one of which said that under Vladimir Putin, Russia has become like a, quote, "virtual mafia state," unquote. According to The Guardian, Harding is the first British journalist to be kicked out of Russia since the end of the Cold War. A couple of weeks back, we reported on the departure of Keith Olbermann from the U.S. 24-hour news channel MSNBC. It did not take long for him to find a new home. Olbermann is taking his act to Current TV. If Current sounds familiar to you, it's probably because of former presidential candidate Al Gore's involvement in the channel's launch 5 years ago. Current had an ambitious but ultimately flawed idea of relying heavily on user-generated content for programming. But viewing figures were low, and the channel is now producing more conventional programming. Olbermann, whose anti-Republican rhetoric kept getting him in trouble with his MSNBC bosses, says he went with Current because he can operate independently of corporate interference there. But Current's ratings remain microscopic compared to MSNBC's, so it will be interesting to see if Olbermann's fans follow him to his new home on the dial. There's a brand new media player on the web, the result of a middle-aged new media company, the Huffington Post, being gobbled up by one of the web's elder generation, AOL. The co-creator of the Huffington Post, Arianna Huffington, has merged her news and opinion site with AOL in a reported $315 million deal. That's a lot of money for a site that has only just started to turn a profit. Ms. Huffington will still be in charge editorially of the newly formed Huffington Post Media Group as president and editor-in-chief, but will also oversee all of AOL's news content. The Huffington Post has been a go-to site for politically liberal Americans since its launch in 2005, growing in prominence during the run-up to the 2008 presidential election.
The merger of the #1 internet company with the #1 media company.
AOL hopes that this merger works out better than its acquisition of Time Warner back in 2000. That was an ill-fated marriage of old and new media companies that was dissolved in 2009. Media mogul Rupert Murdoch is still trying to figure out how to make money from the web, and his latest foray has taken him into the land of Apple and the iPad. The News Corp chairman was personally on hand for the launch of The Daily, a paperless newspaper custom-built for the Apple tablet computer.
New times demand new journalism.
The Daily calls itself a general interest publication, but it does have a bit of a tabloid feel to it. Subscribers will pay 99 cents a week. That's about 14 cents a day charged to their credit cards. But it remains to be seen whether news consumers will want to pay for The Daily when they can get other digital news sources for free. The Daily did get some help on launch day from Fox News, which broke away from its coverage of the unrest in Egypt to cover the event.
The avant-garde future of communication and journalism.
Fox host Neil Cavuto was asked if that was because Fox and The Daily have the same owner. Cavuto said that might have something to do with it. The news media love anniversary stories. We're no exception. We're doing one now on Haiti. Anniversaries of big events give news outlets the chance to revisit stories. So editors had January 12th circled on their calendars long ago. Last January's earthquake in Haiti was a made-for-TV megastory, a picture-rich humanitarian disaster in a dirt-poor country. Reporters from international media outlets parachuted back in last month, and many Haitians disapproved of what they focused on. Some people thought that the coverage of prayer services involving heads of state and walking tours with Hollywood celebrities rather missed the point. And Haiti's own journalists are still struggling for a variety of reasons to report on the issues that Haitians themselves care about. The Listening Post's Jason Mojica now on Haiti's earthquake and the media 1 year on.
Today marks a grim anniversary. Just 1 year ago, then a massive earthquake devastated the Caribbean nation of Haiti.
The death toll from the cholera outbreak in Haiti has officially surpassed 1,200, but health officials believe many more have died.
More than 1 million people remain in makeshift housing. Hundreds of thousands of children still need food, shelter, and schools.
More than a year after the devastating earthquake that destroyed much of Port-au-Prince and the onslaught of international media attention the disaster received, the situation in Haiti remains dire. A UN mission, thousands of aid organizations, and billions of dollars in donations haven't brought the relief that Haitians had hoped for. Many Haitians have become frustrated, not only at the failure of international goodwill to translate into progress, but at what they see as sensationalized reporting that fails to address specific problems on the ground.
The international media is too focused on catastrophe. This is a big, big problem because there are a lot of things very positive happening in Haiti, but they don't care. It's a pity.
The problem with international media is they come around especially to expose Haitian poverty, Haitian problems. We are like in a circus. Haitians are like animals in a circus that everybody come around to look at. What do Haitians need is not to open themselves to the world. They want some help. They want a real assistance, not humanitarian assistance. They want assistance to progress.
We are in Port-au-Prince at the Notre Dame Cathedral that has been reduced to rubble. I think we just come back for a year, the anniversary, and that's all good, and then we'll probably forget about it for another year or two, and then come back and, oh, what happened to Haiti? The media usually just skims over the coverage and really just focuses on small themes like the 1 year anniversary, and they really don't touch the important stuff as why is there no reconstruction going on right now? Why is it taking so long? And really like looking at the corruption problems or disorganization that NGOs are having right now.
What are some of the events going on there right now?
Foreign reporters may realize where their coverage is lacking, but until they do something to change it, the heavy lifting will be left to independent Haitian journalists. But their work is often stymied by a media environment that has been repressive in the past and promises to be dangerous and difficult well into the future.
If you're doing your job under these circumstances and you try to do your job as you should, you're going to be in trouble for sure. During the election, we had about at least 20 journalists who were attacked, threatened to death, or persecuted by people involved with the elections, by candidates, by supporters of candidates, and people who are fanatics.
I think journalism is always dangerous, but I don't think that the danger comes from the government, because we are really now having freedom of the press in Haiti, maybe too much freedom. Sometimes you are having too much freedom and it's not good either.
That freedom tends to benefit foreign reporters more than it does Haitian journalists.
Government officials give better access to the international media. It's not a good thing because most of the time they project a bad image of the country. They distort the government line without knowing. Haitian authority thinks that the Haitian journalists have a personal issue with them. Often they are blacklisted by the authorities, but it's not true. We are searching for information for ourselves, and we are the voice of the voiceless.
Sometimes we read in the press some interview that the president, for example, has given to foreign press that he hasn't given to Haiti. I think, they speak more openly to the foreign press than to the Haitian press. It happens very often when we read those interviews in Le Monde or in Miami Herald or in New York Times that we say, what, he said that?
And while Haitian reporters continue their struggle to break news stories that matter to the Haitian public, the international media continue to focus on the kind of stories they already know how to tell, like that of the Hollywood celebrity with a humanitarian heart of gold.
Moving back and forth between those two worlds, is that hard for you?
Disaster, violence, and disease will always grab headlines. But when it comes to the issues facing Haiti on a daily basis, the attention span of the world's news organizations is limited.
I think the international media has to shut up first and then try to go deeply in itself and analyze what is really happening instead of talking, and you don't really know what is happening.
I think they will never be able to do it good enough because they don't know the culture. There are many things that they don't necessarily apprehend. There has been a great attention given to Haiti because of the earthquake, and the international media has done a great job at that level. But when it comes to, going into the detail to see how people are living and what are the day-to-day challenges that people are facing, the world does not know how bad it is.
More Global Village Voices now on the Haiti story, 12 months after the earthquake.
The conventional wisdom is that Haiti benefits from international press coverage that keeps its plight in the limelight. But a more realistic view is that Haiti represents a useful spectacle for the foreign press that, in times of disaster, drives up ratings with shocking poverty porn. Here in Port-au-Prince, families living in miserable tent camps over a year after the earthquake often curse at journalists who come and go. They can see what the foreign press has accomplished for them over the years. Effectively nothing.
One of the aspects of this discussion that cannot be overlooked is the impact of Haitian radio expat stations. These media outlets, such as Radio Soleil here in New York, have been critical in linking Haitians living abroad with those still living in the Caribbean nation.
The media often portrays Haitians as victims, but rarely focuses on the fact that their biggest problem is external interference. It's not enough to sympathize with Haiti. The media must also acknowledge that the only way out for Haitians is to rise up.
Finally, another Super Bowl has come and gone, and viewers got to watch more than just a football game from Dallas. They also got a festival of advertising. Commercial time on America's biggest game of the year is very expensive, and once they've gone to air, the ads live on in the viral world, with web users sending their favorites onto their friends. Here are three of our favorites. The e-trading baby is back, along with a forceful child and an office worker who's living the nightmare of the email faux pas, hitting reply to all when he meant to click on reply. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Oh no. Rod, you sent this email reply all. You hit reply all. You know I was wrong. You just sent this email to me. Could you imagine?
Yeah, I'm always reading about how this market is so tough, you know. I tell people, go to E-Trade, you know. Bless you, Peppers. You know, no matter what the market does, E-Trade can help. They got strategies, screeners, 24/7 customer support. Anyway, they have pretty much every investment you need. You know, Peppers, I told you to get a flu shot.